Good morning, one and all. You made it through the rain. You're going to be so glad you came through the rain today. So if you're just beginning to sit down, enjoy. If you're out in the hallway thinking, should I come in? Absolutely, you should do it now. If you're out in the social hall or up on the mezzanine and you're a part of our community there today, please feel free to come in. We have some extraordinary music we're going to be sharing today, but lots of other things going on. My name is Fred Wooden. I am the preacher in this church, and I share clergy duties with my colleague, Christopher Rowe, who is our Minister of Spiritual Life and Learning, and today our impromptu but never less than excellent organist who will be helping us with the prelude and the postlude and our second hymn. We have lots of guest musicians, wonderful ones. Our very dear friend and member Robert Byrons is at the piano, and we have 4 singers, no less than 4 singers. From last week, you may remember Sarah Fossey. We also have Carrie Ledet, or is it Ledette? I don't know what. Ledet, oh, français. And we have Jonathan Lovegov and Jeff Peerbolt, and you'll be hearing those 2 gentlemen not only this week, but next week. And we're going to have a splendid time exploring a piece of music that's been dear to me for a very long time. Lots of things go on in this church, and you can learn more about them right there in your Sunday bulletin. We'd like to make a point of saying that there is a lot of stuff going on in the next month. We're having our homecoming dance in a couple of weeks. And in another week or so, we're going to be having other excellent music. You will not believe all the good fun we're going to be having. We have things going on in the social hall after church today, and lots of things that you can learn about online or with other material we have available. Our governing board has a table out there. Our Befrienders, a wonderful lay ministry of connection and appreciation and listening, will be available. And I want to introduce a friend of a friend. Lupe Ramos Montigny asked me if I could introduce someone to introduce a group, and this turns out to be shall we say, a co-conspirator in the Unitarian Universalist world that I inhabit when I'm not here. Linda Brundage is here, and she's asked for a few minutes to talk about what she has written on her jacket, the Michigan Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence, and they'll be giving a presentation later in a few weeks, but this is to get you interested now. Linda, would you have a few words, please?
Thank you. Good morning, and I appreciate the invitation to be here. I'm a mom, I'm a grandma, I'm a great-grandma, a psychologist, and a person of faith. I have been a gun violence prevention advocate since January 2013. The Michigan Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence mission statement is, we are a grassroots organization working toward the prevention of gun violence through community education and stronger gun laws. As of yesterday morning, we have had in this country 41,914 gun incidences, 11,112 deaths, not including suicides, 312 mass shootings, 2,813 deaths of children and teens, and 1,714 officer-involved shootings. This is an epidemic, a public health crisis. The increase in the gun death rate is currently being driven by suicides. 60% of gun deaths are self-inflicted. I'm here today to help us address the daily grinding death in our communities, nearly 40,000 every year. 2/3 of those are suicides. All deaths from firearms matter. Horrific shootings like Parkland get our attention, but we must realize that this type of gun massacre represents only a very small fraction of gun deaths. We must commit ourselves to change so that our Black and brown children can walk to school without fear of death by guns. Our Black and brown children must be able to play outside without fear of gun deaths. If we are going to put an end to this senseless tragedy, We must stand up to ignorance and hate, but we must also stand up to the gun industry and the NRA. That means standing up to our gun-pushing legislators, like the one who is trying to put more guns in schools, or the ones who will not even allow a hearing on common sense gun legislation. The gun industry is a parasite. It feeds off of human misery. It cares nothing for black lives or blue lives or any lives, only profit. If we're going to take our communities back from, we are going to take our communities back from anyone who puts profit over life. Access to firearms is the connection in all gun violence deaths. More guns equals more death. Homicides, suicides, unintentional child deaths, there's a clear correlation between access to weapons and death. We do not want to live in this culture of fear. We don't want guns everywhere. Our First Amendment rights must not be infringed. We must stop the hate-filled rhetoric. We need this morning to be together, to build a community filled with love, not hate, love, not fear. Let us remember, feel united with one another, and reflect on what is going on, and pledge to act together for our children and communities. We need all of you to join us in action. While we must remember and pray, we must also write, email, call our legislators regularly. We must also testify as needed to change laws. The Michigan Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence is having a legislative day in Lansing on October 30th. There'll be more information coming out about that, and we hope you can join us. Stop at our table in the coffee hour to learn more about our work. It's not that we don't know what works, but we must have the political will for action. These final words are a rework of a piece written shortly after Sandy Hook by Abby Robertson of Denver, Colorado. It's called I Am a Mom. I am a person who is blind to the gun violence in our country, but now that I see clearly, I cannot look away. I'm a person who understands that guns are wanted for hunting and self-protection, but I wish that this could be restricted to people who can pass a background check. I'm a person who believes that it would be much harder for a criminal to get a gun if private sales would require a background check. I'm a person who knows that assault weapons are weapons of war, not protected by the Second Amendment, and do not belong in our streets. I'm a person who agrees that mental health is a bit of the problem, and I know extreme risk protection orders would save lives, especially from suicide. I'm a person who knows that weapons-free zones should remain weapons-free, except for trained law enforcement. And we should not have guns in schools, full stop. I'm a person who believes that a child should never, ever have access to a weapon, and the adult owner of that firearm must be held accountable for the use of that gun. I am a mom who is deeply saddened and heartbroken when any other mom suffers the pain of losing a child. I am a person who vows to take action every single day until this problem has been mitigated and America can be at peace. Let us honor those who perished and save those who will perish if we fail to act by rolling up our sleeves and engaging in the hard work of participatory democracy. It is a moral imperative to reduce gun violence. We are all part of the interdependent web of life. Any loss is all our loss. Thank you.
Be alert. We will be offering a presentation in full in weeks to come, in which you can learn more about the Michigan Coalition to End Gun Violence and also have some questions and answers dealt with so you can become more informed and more involved. Christopher, I think we need some music to pull our souls into positions of worship. Can you do that for me? Thank you. Wow. Thank you, comrade. As I say most every week, how rare it is and how lovely this fellowship of those who meet together for spiritual life. Because we come here in this time, in this place, to rediscover the gift of religious community, to renew our faith in the holiness, goodness, and beauty of life, to reaffirm the way of the open mind and the generous heart, to rekindle the flame of memory and hope, and always to reclaim the vision of an earth made fair with all her people one. To that end, we are here each and every week because this and every day is a day which the Lord has made. Therefore, we rejoice and are glad in it. So I'm going to bring my colleague back to work here because he is going to give us a little common learning from the Learning Commons.
Good morning. It's funny, I have a third grade journal where I wrote to my teacher that when I grew up I was going to be a preacher organist. And here we are. I don't know why I said that, but manifest. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, and Eden sinks to grief. So dawn goes down to day, for nothing gold can stay. Robert Frost. I'm reminded of that poem every year about this time. It's not hard to imagine why. There's little, tiny signs that green cannot stay forever. That's ironic because we started our color year with green. But change is inevitable, and we feel it. We feel it everywhere. We feel it in the seasons. We feel it in our communities. We feel it in the congregation. We feel it in Washington. We feel and sense and see and smell it everywhere. Today in the character school, they're actually meeting change head on. They're building rangolis. It comes from India. You've probably seen it. It looks like a mandala, and it's got rice and sand and flower petals, and you make these beautiful, beautiful pieces. They almost look like our rose window back there. They're unbelievable. If you've never seen one in person, I hope you get the chance, because it's mind-blowing how they can make these intricate designs. And then you wipe it away. In our case, we're probably going to vacuum them, but that's it. That's all you get. We're going to create these beautiful rangolis together in the character school, and we're going to wipe them away. But it doesn't minimize the experience of creating them together. It doesn't minimize the experience that they will have learning about how challenging change can be, but how life-giving and fulfilling it can be as well. They're going to be doing those in the chapel today, and so if you get the chance, I do want to invite you to pop your head in. Take a look as our youngest teach us how to face change head on. And then get excited, because next week we face change head on aesthetically as the green subsides to more company and more change. But you'll have to come to find out what that is. Blessed be.
It's time to sing. And I chose this hymn because it comes right after the autumn equinox, because it's about the change of the seasons. This tune and text is called Lady of the Seasons Laughter. Am I correct in that? Lady of the Seasons. It's number 51 or 2. Yeah, there. Number 51, Lady of the Seasons Laughter. It's a beautiful tune, a lovely text, and it's about how we live through the changes of the seasons and the seasons of life. Robert Byrons is going to help us, so if you could play through it, and then we'll join in and we'll sing all the verses after he's played through it once, okay? Breathe in, breathe out, and sit down. That's almost a lullaby, isn't it? I love that song because it has this a kind of circling quality like the earth itself. We go through changes and yet we go through some over and over again. What does that have to do with the offering? Well, like it or not, no matter how much we do, tomorrow will need us to do more. I sometimes say that parish ministry like I do is kind of like housekeeping. It doesn't matter how good this week's sermon is, you got to serve up another one 7 days from now. Doesn't matter how many budgets you write, you'll read another one next year. No matter how many people you visit who have been sick, as they get better, others will need your attention. What we're doing is what in Hebrew would be called tikkun olam. And since it's nearly Rosh Hashanah, I want to introduce that term, tikkun olam, which means to be the repair of the world. Who of you have a house you have to keep in good order? You buy it, and if it's new, you can wait a couple of years, but I have a 150-year-old house, and it's like a 150-year-old person. It needs a lot of attention. But it's worth it because its value is larger than the effort to take care of. Friends, when we take the offering, we divide it equally between the needs of the church to maintain itself as a place of hospitality and hope, and serving a world out there where we can't be but need to be, at least in our hearts. And so we give half the money to organizations that are out there repairing the world. There are many of those organizations. You can find them listed on our website. They deal with children and women and hunger and education and danger and all sorts of things. For over a decade now, we've helped at least one person graduate from Grand Rapids Community College by giving them a full scholarship in their second year, and that means there are 10 people out there who are doing things they couldn't, except that we helped them get there. We are repairing the world. And so I want you to think about that as how much plaster do you have in your pocket today? Because you're going to reach into your wallet or to your bag, and I want you to fill a larger hole than you expected. Yeah, if you roll up a single dollar bill, you can put your finger in that dike, but if you got a nice big $20 bill, you can put up a big patch in that hole in the world we're trying to repair. And to help you do that, I'm going to give you some beautiful music. Actually, Robert is going to do it. This is one of the first arabesque, isn't it? It's a beautiful piece. Many of you heard by Claude Debussy, and it's a dance. So I want you to dance that money out of your pocket like this. And as the music goes by, I want you to let it flutter gently into the bowl. Like Amy Semple McPherson said years ago, let not this house be troubled with the clanging sound of nickels and dimes, but let it be filled with the zephyrus sounds of 10s and 20s. So if you could summon our zephyrus selves, Robert, your morning offering to the benefit of this church and of the community will now be most gratefully received. Yeah, he made that sound real easy. It's not. It looks easy on the nose. Oh, I can do that. No, you can't. At least I can. And I've tried. Believe me, I have tried. I'm in a year of what I call a year of preaching musically, when I'm sharing works of music that have been important to me, moving, touching, affecting over the course of my lifetime. And I want to make sure I mention right at the outset that all of the guest musicians you see this week and every week are being supported in part by people like you who have contributed to make their presence possible. And this week, there wasn't room in the program to mention Don and Lancy Lubbers, who are making this piece possible, which you'll hear later. But let's see the next slide. There you go. You'll be hearing two pieces of music today, one live and one recorded. And how many of you remember Schroeder from Peanuts? Okay. Well, this week in my year of preaching musically began 50 years ago, almost exactly. My family was on vacation in Colorado. I was a teenager, and you know how parents are. As you get close to the end of the vacation, they say, well, kids, you should pick a souvenir to take home to remember your trip. And my brother did this, and my sisters did that, and we were in some shopping center in Denver, and I came to my folks, and I was holding something in my hands and said, I'd like this. And they looked at me funny because, you see, it was a complete set of Beethoven symphonies on records. Nothing about it in Colorado at all. But I kept it, obviously, and lo and behold, a year later, the folks at Deutsche Grammophon, a famous German recording company, put out the Beethoven bicentennial edition of every piece of Beethoven ever written, recorded. And when Santa was looking for ideas that year, I said, I want that, Santa. And I still have it. 16 bright blue cases, 80 recordings, many of them unplayed because there's so many, and a big, fat book about Beethoven himself. I may not be able to go note for note with Schroeder, but I can go nose to nose with his devotion to Ludwig van. That was an early youthful obsession, and some of you may have recognized in calling him Ludwig van, that's a reference to a movie and a book called A Clockwork Orange, in which a sociopathic young man commits major acts of violence while listening to Beethoven. And I mention that only because devotion to Beethoven runs the gamut from angelic to demonic. If you're a Beethoven fan, you're in very large company. Now, of course, in that series of recordings I received, the first to come were the symphonies, and then came the concerti. But very soon thereafter was a whole volume of music devoted to Beethoven's music for theater. Did you know he wrote theater music? He wrote music for a play, The Ruins of Athens. He wrote overtures to several pieces. And he wrote an opera, Fidelio. Now, this was new to me. I remember I'm only 17 or 18 years old. Opera was new to me and came with that reputation of being fussy, silly, and unrealistic. But it was Beethoven, so I was going to listen to it. So there I was at home, putting my toe in the operatic water by myself, because you don't invite your teenage friends over to listen to opera. At least I did not. And those were the days of 33 1/3 record players, and they had a tall spindle, and you put 3 records, one atop the other, and they'd click down as one was over. And I was stacking them up and reading about the opera as I was preparing to listen to it. The synopsis told me it was a rescue opera, a genre of the time in which a loyal spouse saves the other spouse from danger or death. And in this case, it's the wife, Leonora, who saves her political prisoner's husband, Florestan. And she does it by disguising herself as a young man and calling himself Fidelio, to work her way into the prison so that she can eventuate his release. So she becomes an employee of the lowly jailer named Rocco, a bluff and gruff basso, who has a daughter, Marcellina, with a sweet, high soprano voice. And then there's the tenor, Giacchino, who pines for Marcellina, but Marcellina only has eyes for Fidelio. You can see it's just one melodramatic thing after the other. And then there's Don Pizarro, Don Pizarro the warden and the fellow who imprisoned Florestan, who is scheming to kill Florestan and make good his effort to hide his crimes. So I put the stack of LPs on the turntable. There's a jaunty overture. It goes straight into a duet where Giacchino confesses his love for Marcellina. But she says, no, I've fallen in love with Fidelio, not knowing that Fidelio is actually Leonore. When Rocco comes in, he is the usual character, and then pretty ho-hum it feels so far. They can't all be Fifth Symphonies after all. Even Beethoven's better than most anybody else, so I keep listening. Before we hear the piece I'm intending, I want you to know a little more. Beethoven spent more time writing Fidelio, correcting it, improving it, than any other piece he wrote. It was a 3-act opera that failed dismally. His friends say, cut it down. Cut it down to 2 acts, which he did. He wrote not 1, but 4 separate overtures for it. It was pretty much a heartbreaker. And he confessed as much in his writings that this piece caused him more grief and more sorrow than any other. And today, strictly speaking, it's very imperfect as drama. It's really kind of hokey. But the music. Yes, that was a lovely overture, and that little duet that starts it is fine. But then comes a piece of music so sublime that the singers could be reading from the phone book and you would still be transported. The words do matter, though, because each of the singers, entering one after the other, embodies to you, the listener, their innermost feelings at that moment. How wondrous, sings Marcellina, and expresses her secret love for Fidelio. And the tune, it's so simple. It's breathless, the way a young woman in love might be breathless. And the quartet gets its name from those words she utters. Mir ist so wunderbar. But I will stop talking and let you hear it. what you may not have noticed is that they all sing exactly the same notes. They just start at different times. It's like row, row, row your boat, except it's no row, row, row your boat. It's called a canon or a round. And what you don't know is that each one is singing different words about their sentiments. Marzellino, who started the ingenue, is in love with Fidelio and says, "He loves me, I can tell." Leonore says, "She loves me, I can tell, and I'm worried." Rocco says, "They love each other, they should get married." He's hopeful like a father would be. And Giacchino says, "She loves him and not me, I'm desperate." So the same notes, the same tune, 4 different sentiments. That's where the genius comes in. Because each sentiment is genuine to the notes they sing, no matter how different they are. The orchestra, in this case, Robert, impersonating strings, woodwinds of all kinds, starts with, well, it starts with low strings, very, very gently. And as it increases in complexity, so do the notes of the orchestra. And suddenly it grows and keeps growing. It grows in a way that you don't realize it's expanding as it's growing, though it's the same notes over and over again. I'm putting this up here because it reminds me of how certain things expand as they grow, not just duplicate, they enlarge. Anyone recognize that? It looks like a nautilus shell, doesn't it? And that's what I thought of as I was thinking of how this piece unfolds. It doesn't just spiral, it expands. And it looks like a nautilus shell in my mind. But what are the numbers doing there? Well, if I were a good mathematician, which I am not, I would explain that this is a Fibonacci series. That is to say, if you take 1 and then go to 2, and then add 1 and 2, you get 3, and add 2 and 3, you get 5, and add 3 and 5, you get 8, and add 8 and 5, you get 30. You see how it works out? And this turns out to be a naturally occurring phenomenon. In nature, yes, it turns into a nautilus shell. It is also the way sunflower seeds are arranged. And I swear to you, Beethoven created a nautilus of a piece of music. Each voice didn't just add, it amplified, it expanded. And it would have gone on forever. But then, smart fellow that he is, Marzellino had a beautiful F sharp near the end, and suddenly it's an F natural. Why do you care? You don't. But it's a way of cycling to the subdominant, which is a way of grabbing the notes, facing them in the other direction, so you sensed the end was coming. That's the genius of the composer, that you didn't know how, but you knew the end was approaching. And it rose and rose and then fell down like a final swell of love, a final breath of pride, or a final sigh of resignation. I was overwhelmed at 17. I'd never heard a piece like this. I was overwhelmed by the way the tune caught the feelings of each one, though the tune was exactly the same. How something so simple, bum, 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 that's not even music, became a melody, and then an aria, and then a duet, and then it was just astonishing. The way something like that is astonishing, because it happens and creates beauty just by existing. But this is not a mathematics lecture. I'm not going to tell you more about Mr. Fibonacci or how it's the basis of the golden mean, because this isn't a mathematics lecture, nor is it a music appreciation lesson. Sure, I want you to love this piece. I want you to go and listen to it. I want you to listen to the whole opera because it's wonderful. All I'm saying is that 50 years after I heard it for the first time at the age of 17, this thing still transports me. And so I ask why, and that's what makes a sermon. Well, the best way to put it is to find words that express that feeling, and I don't have them, but thank goodness someone else does. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused. That's what hearing that did to me. It lifted me out of myself. It lifted me away from the moment. And imagine for a moment, here's a piece created in 1810 that I'm listening to in 1970 that is transcending itself and making me transcend myself. It's astonishing. Here it is singing of hope and fear, and it reminded me that sometimes feelings get all mixed up inside. Have you ever had that chest tightening feeling when you were in love? Who hasn't had that? Didn't it feel like fear at the same time? How could you tell the difference? And then the music, it spills out as the notes become busier, the way you have to tell somebody something when you're feeling strongly. I'm terrified, I'm in love. It's hard to tell one feeling from another, isn't it? They can often feel very similar. Our pounding heart can mean many things. Is it any wonder relationships are so hard? I hear in this brief quartet the complexity of our emotions and their simplicity. Both are true. And that's what a sermon tries to say, to catch the simple and the complex, the true, and hold it very gently to be seen. Of course, that's not the end of the opera. The story does go on in melodramatic form, and ultimately, yes, Florestan is rescued, fear not. But before that comes another moment, another transcendent moment of music that I cannot give to you live because it requires a male chorus of 50. You did not give enough money for that. Rocco is instructing Fidelio to release prisoners so they can have a brief exercise in the courtyard, and a piece very similar to what you just heard begins, and it begins the same way as the other one. Can we start that up? So, there is Fidelio opening the...
Fidelio!
That's Rocco.
Rocco, ich bat euch schon einige Male, diese armen Gefangenen in unserem Garten zu lassen.
Ohne Erlaubnis des Gouverneurs.
Ihr verspracht es immer. Bitte, Papa.
That's Marcelina, if you couldn't tell. Now listen carefully.
Gut. Und ich gehe zu Pizarro und rede für euch.
And now it starts. Sounds like an organ a little bit, doesn't it? And in a few moments, a sound, like the sound of a gentle wind.
Wir wollen mit Vertrauen auf Gottes Hilfe bauen. Die Hoffnung flüstert sanft mir zu, wir werden frei, wir finden Ruhe, wir finden Rettung. Sprecht leise, haltet euch zurück. Wir sind belauscht mit Ohr und Blick. Wir sind belauscht mit Ohr und Blick. Sprecht leise, sprecht leise.
Oh, welche Lust. Oh, what joy. We heard joy at the beginning. Mir ist so wunderbar, wonderful. And how we have joy. Joy from prisoners. What joy are they feeling? Just to breathe the open air. That's exactly what they say. Oh, what joy to breathe the open air. Nur hier ist Lebens. Only here is life. A different sentiment entirely, but so similar in tone. A hymn, virtually. Did you hear the single voice? The imprisoned priest, if you could read his collar. Hope whispers softly in my ears, we shall be free, we shall then find peace. And then they are led back into the dark of their cells. Now, I have real doubts that prisoners sing like that on a day-to-day basis. But we are in the open air. And yet we sing like prisoners, do we not? Come on, I've been listening to you for 15 years. You are really lame at hymn singing. Why do we do it then? Well, it's tradition. But we're not Tevye, and this is not Fiddler on the Roof. We don't want to. We just do it. And I want to point to some of you who may have seen Ken Burns' recent series on country music. And so many of the singers they interviewed began life in very poor households, without radios, without pianos, maybe with a guitar, perhaps with a banjo. And these are families who in the middle of nowhere sang. That's how they lifted their hearts. The whole Carter family got together as a singing group by singing at home because that was all they had to do. Families used to sing. I can remember us being on road trips, not very long, just 3 or 4 hours, but this is before we had a radio in the car. Remember a day before there was radio in the car? And my mother would get us to sing songs. They were often pop songs from the 30s and 40s. We didn't know, but we sang. Did we like it? I'm not sure we did, but it kept us together. We've heard of sea shanties and work songs. I think we've lost something as a culture that we no longer feel comfortable singing as a community. I'm embarrassed. I can't carry a tune. You don't want to hear my voice. That's not the point. It isn't how good you are, it's that we are using our voices together to express the things that matter. Liberal religionists that I know of in Hungary and in the Czech Republic, they sing a cappella in 4 parts, A, because they can't afford an organ, and B, because that's how they hold on to their community. Back on September 11, 2001, a neighbor of mine in Brooklyn, where I was serving at the time, asked if he could play a song or two at a gathering in my church that evening for all the sorrow and confusion and anger. I did not know him, but he had hair here, there, and everywhere. Turned out this fellow was a fellow named Dan Zanes. Anybody remember that name? He's a pop singer with a group called, of all things, the Flesh Tones. We got acquainted. And when we met up and I saw a story about him in the newspaper years later after I moved here. He was sitting in the airport one day, and he was bumped from a flight, and they were waiting, and there was a family with 2 little girls, and he said, he was having his guitar with him, why don't we sing a few songs? And he started singing, She'll Be Coming Round the Mountain, right? And they did not know it. And he said, well, what would you like to sing? And he said, can you sing something by Britney Spears? If we look for the decline of civilization, it is in the outsourcing of music from our own voices to an industry that makes us pay money to hear the music we should be able to sing for ourselves. You are all musicians. You are all voices. You all have the capacity to express your hope, your fear, your anger, your dread. Singing is how the heart speaks. Am I right, Carol Cloister? Because music, no matter what the words, finds truth in them we didn't know was there. I don't agree with the theology of Amazing Grace, but when I hear it, I feel the authenticity of the person who wrote it. I feel the humanity of those words, the truth behind the words. How many of you have heard Deep River and found yourself on the verge of tears? Do you even know what it's saying, but you know something momentous is involved? Old Man River, for that matter. Who's ever heard Paul Robeson sing that, and it'll break you in 2? When was the last time you sang either one? You know, Martin Luther is famous for his theology, but he won converts by writing good tunes. Ein Festburg ist unser Gott. Charles and the Wesley brothers all together made more converts with their great Methodist tunes than they did by making people read books and Bibles. The power of music is in its capacity to make us feel our own voices. And that's what Beethoven did for me today. Let me go on to we'll get to this in just a moment. Whenever we hear a beautiful piece of music, we're singing along, aren't we? We may not be making noise, but our voices want to join in. Did you not hear the hymn that you heard from those prisoners? By the way, that's a beta product for the Ode to Joy. that song. Song takes us out of ourselves to the deepest inside and the furthest outside we can be. It is the moment we become a vessel for life, not a possessor of life. If you felt even a moment of that in listening to those four beautiful singers and listening to the Prisoner's Chorus, it's time for you to start singing and reclaim your voice of truth, of love, of justice. Because remember, anytime we sing, es ist so wunderbar, it is wondrous. That's my message this morning. Now let's talk about prayer, because we're going to end up listening again. If Walt Whitman is right, that all prayers are groans, I want to know what is making you groan today, and what's the distance between a groan and a song. There's not a person in this room that doesn't have a leaden place in your heart right now. Whether it is sickness or loss or doubt or fear, whether it is simply nostalgia, whatever it is, it may not run your whole life, but it's there right now. And that's where your song comes from. It doesn't come from your happy place, it comes from your sad place. Because as I'm trying to remember, Khalil Gibran says, your joy is your sorrow unmasked. Your sorrow carves out the place inside of you that becomes the hollow place from which your voice comes out. Where is your sorrow today? We're going to pray in a moment, and I will say a few words, and I will allow a little silence. I will remember our dead, and then we're going to hear one more version of that Prisoner's Chorus, but it's completely different. Let's pray together. Ancient One, fount of every blessing, make of my voice a song. Perhaps not with notes so beautiful that Ludwig would make them into an opera. Perhaps not with delicacy that Debussy would engrave upon a page. But give to my voice enough song that the sorrow I carry and the joy I seek can be present in the words. Es ist so wunderbar. Give me that voice. The voice of hope and dread, of sorrow and gratitude. Is not every prayer one of those things to be saying wow or help or oops or sorry? We gather our hearts this morning at the very end of this hour, bathed in sounds we can only imagine, hoping that our own souls will thrill to our own voices, our own spirits, and our own hearts. And so now, we pause for a brief silence so that we may take an accounting of our sorrows and our losses, our crimes and misdemeanors, yes, here at the end of the ancient year. Hold them up as an offering and resolve to live with fresh vigor and renewed hope in the year ahead. So let us pray in the perfection of silence. So I promised you another version of the Prisoner's Chorus. What you may not know is that this version is the same notes sung by inmates of 6 different prisons.
Warden grants all inmates 30 minutes of outside rec in the yard starting now. Unlock automatic doors in blocks 135, 136, 137,
heavens. I find that overwhelming in a whole new way, reminding us that even those we find unworthy to be in our midst are still human beings who may still sing, who still have voices, and for whom the open air truly is freedom. I lift up now the names of those who are no longer with us, who in their days gave us the gift of this house, in this place, that we may be chastened, inspired, and strengthened. Eileen Goddard and Barbara Leedy, Elizabeth Collins, Betsy Horning, Patricia Blackburn, Tom Evans, Edward Smith, and Walter Bergman. God, filled with mercy, mercy. In the heavens highest, bring proper rest beneath the wings of your Shekinah to those who have gone to their eternal place of rest. May you are the source of mercy. Shelter them beneath your wings eternally and bind their souls among the living and to you, that we may be at peace, that they may rest in peace. And let us say, amen. We are now going to sing Beethoven. I expect you to sing it as well as the prisoners you just heard. You only have to sing the first two verses because the others are in German and you haven't been coached. So you have no excuse. Breathe the air, for here is freedom. For you shall go out in joy and be led back in peace. The mountains and the hills shall burst into song, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. So saith the prophet, but only if you sing them into being. We are a community of spirit. Let us sing ourselves into the next week and be grateful for the gift of life which is given to us this and every day. Go forth and be glad, and thank our singers for making yours a joyous day. Thank you so much. And now you get to hear a great postlude. Hit it.